The Chinese Communist Party has never controlled the territory of Taiwan.
In my remarks, I'll address 4 questions. First, why does Taiwan matter? Second, what is China's strategy towards Taiwan? Third, how is Taiwan responding? And fourth, how should we prepare?
Could result in despair about Taiwan's future, providing the PRC with an opportunity to advance its strategy of convincing Taiwan citizens that their best...
And to watch Taiwan go from martial law in 1979 to the democracy that they have today, we were duplicating in China, but it's gone the opposite direction.
The United States has to stand with Japan because if we don't, no other country will stand with Taiwan.
前几天美国的参议院召开了台湾相关法案跟台美合作扩大以及增强台湾韧性跟军事等的听证会，里面有非常多台湾人应该要知道，而各大媒体不报道的事情就会让很多人去误解，所以我认为这个有必要做一期翻译的影片给台湾人看看。
Are going to talk about this morning reviewing implementation of the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act and future opportunities for U.S.-Taiwan cooperation. So with that, thank you to our witnesses for being here today. As you all know, Taiwan is under constant threat from China, and its fate has critical implications for the United States and for the world. The Chinese Communist Party has never controlled the territory of Taiwan, but for decades, China has waged psychological war against Taiwan, carried out endless propaganda and cyber attack campaigns to weaken its resilience, and repeatedly undermine the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. In the last year, China's land, sea, air, and rocket forces have carried out increasingly sophisticated military exercises, simulating a blockade and a quarantine of Taiwan. China is also increasing its transnational repression of Taiwanese citizens, efforts to legitimize its false claims, and bullying of other countries to support its position on Taiwan. We all know for Xi Jinping, asserting China's control over Taiwan is a legacy-defining issue. His population is aging. His economy is faltering. China needs a victory, and Xi has set his sights on Taiwan. This is deeply troubling. Taiwan is a vibrant democracy and key U.S. partner in the Indo-Pacific, but is also our 7th largest trading partner and a rapidly growing source of investment in the United States. Idaho, my home state, knows well Taiwan's importance. It is my state's 2nd largest international trading partner. And just last year, we celebrated 40 years of a sister relationship between Idaho and Taiwan. Taiwan is also deeply integrated in the global economy. President Trump is working to boost domestic production of semiconductors. Taiwan plays a key role in that ambition and will remain an important partner for producing the chips that control everything from U.S. missiles to washing machines. Make no mistake, China is the greatest long-term threat to American interest. If we allow China blatant aggression against Taiwan to go unchecked, that will have ripple effects on our Indo-Pacific alliances and seriously hurt our ability to compete with China globally. Look no further than the dispute China is having now with Japan. We have also recently seen China weaponize its dominance of critical supply chains, which is achieved through decades of industrial espionage and unfair trade practices. It has attempted to hold American industries hostage amid the trade talks that are going on with the United States. Taiwan may be at the forefront of China's growing aggression, but it won't be the last stop. That's why we all need to work to counter China's aggression in Taiwan. With that, I'll recognize the ranking.
Over many decades, across many administrations, Republican and Democratic alike, the U.S. has had a strong and enduring relationship with Taiwan. But today, as we meet, we have a worrying backdrop. The Trump administration has been too willing to trade national security for short-term gains. That's a mindset that weakens our deterrence and undermines our allies. Taiwan has become an essential partner whose technological and economic cooperation is central to American life. This hearing comes at a critical moment for that relationship. Taiwan is one of the epicenters of the highly specialized semiconductor industry. It builds the advanced chips that power AI, defense technologies, and clean energy systems. However, Taiwan is more than a semiconductor superpower. One study by the Rhodium Group found that a Chinese blockade of Taiwan could lead to a $2 trillion global disruption of supply chains. And that's just a blockade. According to Bloomberg Economics, the damage from an invasion could reach 10 trillion with a T dollars, roughly 10% of global GDP. So I hope that our witnesses today can help clarify what's at stake for the United States and how China is working to undermine Taiwan. There is strong bipartisan support in this committee and throughout Congress across the national security community for Taiwan. We recently passed out of committee legislation on Taiwan from Senator Risch and myself, including deploying U.S. teams to map and target PRC sanctions pressure points to deter Chinese aggression. But we need to do more. We need to strengthen economic tools to deny Beijing the revenue and technology to wage war. We need to do more in the information space, where Beijing has put particular focus. And we also need to support American allies, from closer defense coordination with Japan and South Korea to demonstrating a united front with our allies on sanctions and export controls. As Dartmouth's Professor Stephen Brooks notes, he says coordinated sanctions with our allies give us real leverage, credible economic pressure that strengthens deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. When we act alone, chasing bilateral trade deals, we sideline that leverage, and that weakness doesn't go unnoticed. Xi Jinping is watching how the United States responds to Russian aggression in Ukraine. Nothing could be a better deterrent to an invasion of Taiwan than defeating Putin in Ukraine and showing the world that America stands by our democratic allies. But deterrence also depends on the choices we make here at home. Delaying arms sales as the U.S. works on a trade deal with China, denying the president of Taiwan the ability to transit through the United States, or imposing tariffs against Taiwan just doesn't help. SFRC report The Price of Retreat made clear Beijing is seizing the advantage as the United States undermines its own tools to compete. With President Trump planning a visit to Beijing next year and negotiations heating up between China and the U.S., I hope today's hearing will help clarify what this moment demands from us at home and what it will take to safeguard the United States-Taiwan relationship in the months ahead. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We have three distinguished witnesses with us today. Dr. Lauren Dickey is an expert on Taiwan defense issues and Chinese strategy toward Taiwan. She previously served as a senior advisor and acting director for Taiwan policy in the Department of Defense and was a research scientist at the Center for Naval Analysis focused on Chinese military issues. Ms. Bonnie Glaser is managing director of the German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific program. She has worked at the intersection of Asia-Pacific geopolitics and U.S. policy for more than 3 decades. Bonnie has published widely in academic and policy journals and consulted for various U.S. agencies, including the Departments of Defense and State. Dr. Rush Doshi is the CV Star Senior Fellow for Asia Studies and Director for the China Strategy Initiative at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is also an assistant professor in Security Studies program at Georgetown's Walsh School of Foreign Service. So we'll start with you, Dr. Dickey. The floor is yours.
For more than 45 years, support for peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait has been one of America's most consistent bipartisan commitments. And the reason is straightforward. Taiwan's security is central to U.S. national security. It affects our economic strength, our military readiness, and our strategic credibility in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan matters to the United States because it is a thriving democracy under pressure, a critical link in the Indo-Pacific security architecture, and the center of the world's most advanced semiconductor supply chain. A crisis in the Taiwan Strait would directly harm U.S. economic security, disrupt defense production, and raise costs for American families. Congress recognized these stakes when it passed TARA. Together with the Taiwan Security Cooperation Initiative, TARA provides the most comprehensive authorities we have ever had to strengthen deterrence. But the effectiveness of these authorities now depends on their urgent and full implementation, along with some adjustments to modernize further how the U.S. operationalizes its Taiwan policy. 4 key areas for improvement stand out. First, Presidential Drawdown Authority has not delivered capability at the scale or speed the situation requires. Concerns about industrial backfills initially slowed execution. Today, Taiwan still lacks sufficient numbers of asymmetric systems, and that shortfall increases risk to U.S. forces should deterrence fail. Second, although TARA authorized a regional contingency stockpile, to the best of my knowledge, DoD has yet to fully realize this authority. No facilities have been built, and no material has been forward positioned. Without pre-positioned munitions and sustainment, the United States and our allies would begin any crisis from a position of delay. Third, foreign military sales to Taiwan remain too slow. Industrial bottlenecks and bureaucratic complexity routinely push critical programs behind schedule or over budget. These delays weaken confidence in U.S. commitments, complicate Taiwan's defense planning, and again, increase the risk to U.S. forces in a crisis. Fourth, states' authorities that were delegated under the Taiwan Relations Act in an executive order from President Bill Clinton have been unchanged since 1996. In other words, they no longer match the tempo of today's relationship and slow down other bureaus and agencies from engaging with Taiwan. And the American Institute in Taiwan, which manages one of the most consequential portfolios of any U.S. mission, faces staffing and facility constraints that limit its ability to support an ever-expanding security agenda. To address these challenges, I'll quickly offer 6 recommendations that are detailed further in my written testimony. First, fully resource all Taiwan-relevant security assistance authorities and link them to a multi-year DoD plan with quarterly reporting on the status of how each authority is being used. Second, accelerate arms sales deliveries by establishing a fast lane list of pre-approved platforms and munitions that are eligible for expedited export, tech release, and contracting processes. Third, authorize and appropriate the funds and authorities necessary for the U.S., importantly in partnership with Taiwan, to construct and fill a regional contingency stockpile. Fourth, modernize states' outdated oversight policies and require annual reporting on Taiwan-related engagements that the Department of State disapproves. Fifth, strengthen AIT's staffing, facilities, and leadership, including by mandating Senate confirmation for the AIT Taipei director and immediate appointment of a Washington-based AIT chairperson. And lastly, continue to deepen congressional engagement with Taiwan's legislative yuan to support sustained defense budget growth and critical policy reforms. In short, deterrence in the Taiwan Strait is still achievable, but it requires even greater urgency and the full use and expansion of the authorities that Congress has already put in place. Ultimately, implementing TERRA effectively protects American interests, American workers, and American lives, but more can and must be done. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Ms. Glazer, the floor is yours.
It is crucial that Americans have a deeper appreciation of why Taiwan is important to the United States. Robust public support for Taiwan can contribute to strengthening deterrence and to help make possible U.S. defense of Taiwan if deterrence fails. In my view, Taiwan's significance to the United States and the free world is threefold. First, as George W. Bush stated during his presidency, Taiwan is a beacon of democracy to Asia and the world. Taiwan serves as a powerful alternative to the Chinese Communist Party's led political system. Second, Taiwan manufactures over 60% of the world's total output of all semiconductors and more than 90% of the most advanced chips, which are essential for virtually all electronic devices, including computers, cars, smartphones, and military equipment. Third, failure to support Taiwan in the face of PRC coercion and aggression could prompt our allies to doubt the credibility and reliability of the United States' defense commitments to them. This is especially true for the Japanese, who worry that PRC occupation of Taiwan would put Tokyo's sea lanes at risk and hinder Japan's self-defense forces from defending the country's southwest islands. The threat of a full-scale PRC invasion or blockade or other actions are real, but not imminent or inevitable. Beijing's preferred strategy is to coerce Taiwan to agree to unification without resorting to overt kinetic warfare. The PRC seeks to achieve its goal by using gray zone tactics and psychological pressure to induce despair among Taiwan's people, erode their confidence in continued U.S. support for Taiwan's security, and make unification appear as the best choice. PRC experts and officials view Washington as currently prioritizing relations with Beijing over Taipei and exercising caution in policy toward Taiwan so as not to undermine prospects for reaching deals with the PRC. The PRC's deterrence calculus is shaped heavily by its assessment of Washington's support for Taiwan and its willingness to intervene to defend it. If Beijing concludes that U.S. support for Taiwan is waning, it is likely to adopt a more coercive risk-tolerant strategy across political, military, and gray zone domains. The Taiwan public's historically favorable view of the United States is declining, and doubts about American dependability to defend Taiwan if attacked are growing. Doubts in Taiwan about U.S. commitment to the island's security and willingness to defend it if attacked could result in despair about Taiwan's future, providing the PRC with an opportunity to advance its strategy of convincing Taiwan citizens that their best and perhaps only option is unification on Beijing's terms. Pessimism about U.S. willingness to support and defend Taiwan is likely to weaken resolve among the island's citizens to resist a takeover by the PRC and could embolden the PRC to undertake riskier actions to compel unification. In my written testimony, I've included many recommendations for the committee's consideration, and here I will highlight just a few. One, mandate the Department of State to counter the PRC's distortion of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758, which Beijing uses to embed its One China principle in the international community and block Taiwan's participation in UN-affiliated agencies. It is also using this resolution to prepare for a legal justification should it decide to take Taiwan by military force. Two, send more CODELs to Taiwan to ensure an up-to-date understanding of Taiwan's evolving security needs and domestic dynamics, which are changing, and to reaffirm U.S. commitment to Taiwan's democracy, prosperity, and security. Three, instruct the U.S. Trade Representative to finalize the U.S.-Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade. And the Senate should also approve the Double Tax Relief Act to address the double taxation of cross-border investments. Fourth, explore ways for international partners to provide equipment to the United States that could then be passed along to Taiwan. This would be path-breaking. And finally, facilitate resilience and security cooperation between Taiwan and regional partners like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, as well as with countries with extensive civil defense experience, such as Finland, Sweden, and Israel. So I thank the committee for its attention to this important issue and look forward to your questions.
In my remarks, I'll address 4 questions. First, why does Taiwan matter? Second, what is China's strategy towards Taiwan? Third, how is Taiwan responding? And fourth, how should we prepare? So first, why does Taiwan matter? I want to offer 2 main reasons. The first is, according to Bloomberg Economics, as we've heard, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would cost the global economy $10 trillion, 10% of global GDP, and that is an economic setback bigger than the global financial crisis, bigger than the COVID pandemic, and rivaling the Great Depression. And that is because Taiwan makes the semiconductors upon which the world relies. But there's a second important risk, too. If we cannot or will not support Taiwan, then our allies and partners will assume in Asia that we won't support them either, and they will accommodate themselves to China's power. And if we lose them to China, we lose our best path to reindustrializing America. Our Asian allies still know how to build things, and they're investing in U.S. manufacturing projects from shipbuilding to battery plants under President Trump. But if Asia falls under Chinese hegemony, then all of that, those investments, those supply chains, and our economic future, could become subject to China's veto. That leads to a second question. What is China's strategy? Beijing wants to seize Taiwan to end the Chinese Civil War, to secure President Xi's legacy, and for geopolitical advantage, and that strategy has two parts. The first is to break Taiwan's will. 4 years ago, China carried out 1,000 incursions into Taiwan's claimed air defense identification zone. This year, it's approaching 4,000. 4 years ago, China rarely crossed the median line that divides the strait. This year, it's crossed that median line over 1,000 times. And 4 years ago, China maintained a modest naval footprint around Taiwan. Now the island is routinely encircled by over a dozen military vessels. China is preparing for gray zone provocations, persistent operations inside Taiwan's 24 nautical mile zone, the seizure of outlying islands, and even a short-term quarantine of Taiwan itself. And in addition to that military pressure, as we've discussed, China is using cyber intrusions, lawfare, political warfare, international isolation, disinformation, economic coercion, and human espionage to weaken Taiwan's resolve. And if that doesn't work, they're preparing for war. They've undertaken the fastest military buildup in modern history, 65 ships added in 5 years, with a Navy that will soon be 50% larger than ours. They're stockpiling commodities, producing missiles around the clock, hardening their financial system against us, building nuclear forces at breakneck speed, and infiltrating American critical infrastructure, all to deter or defeat us. That is a wartime footing. So how is Taiwan handling this threat? Taiwan has much to do, but it's not standing still either. They've doubled their defense spending in the last 10 years, and in the next year, they hope to go from 2.5% to more than 3% of GDP, possibly even 5% if you include supplemental spending. They've extended conscription from 4 months to 1 year. They're investing in asymmetric capabilities, anti-ship cruise missiles, unmanned systems, short-range air defense, and they're standing up new commands, like the Littoral Combat Command, to integrate those asymmetric capabilities. They've created a new National Cybersecurity Command, strengthened defenses against disinformation, and critically, they've launched a whole-of-society defense resilience program, including president-level participation in Taiwan. And a few days ago, that program distributed millions of handbooks, one to each household in Taiwan, on how to get them ready for an invasion or a blockade. Taiwan has much more to do, but it's moving, and with our support, it can move much faster. So fourth and finally, how do we respond? And I'll just offer a few recommendations from my written testimony. First, we need to balance deterrence and reassurance signaling. We should spend less energy on symbolic issues that provoke Beijing and more on the security assistance that deters it. Second, we need to bolster Taiwan's morale at a time of uncertainty. Concluding a long-sought Taiwan tax treaty will help, and so will congressional delegations at a time when executive branch travel is reduced. Third, we need to move faster on arms sales by putting Taiwan first in the FMS queue and working around production bottlenecks with appropriations for FMF, PDA, DPA, third-party procurement, and of course, prepositioning on Taiwan itself. Fourth, we need regular interagency contingency planning for Taiwan scenarios, and Congress can require it. Fifth, we need legislation that creates broad and flexible authorities for sanctions, which for these scenarios we simply don't have. And sixth, we need to prepare for blockade and quarantine scenarios, including by providing maritime insurance to foreign vessels carrying energy to Taiwan when the market will not provide that insurance to anyone. Seventh, we need to work with allies on contingency planning, economic responses, and deterrence signaling. And all of those recommendations are just a start. There's much more that we can and should do. And if we do it, we can deter aggression and maintain peace and stability. I'd like to thank you for your time and the opportunity today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
I was interested in your comment that the trajectory of the Taiwanese view of the U.S. Commitment is on a downward turn, which is interesting since more and more we're engaging there. How do you explain that? Or first of all, how is it measured? And then secondly, how do you explain that?
As I cited in my testimony, this is measured by public opinion polls. There are many public opinion centers in Taiwan. They're not all reliable. I've tried to cite...
Kind of like America.
Yes, kind of like us. I've tried to cite different ones also from the opposition. But it's quite clear that this is the trend in Taiwan. Decline in confidence in whether the United States will come to Taiwan's defense. And I think there are several reasons. One, of course, is PRC narratives, disinformation, propaganda that is really quite prevalent in Taiwan. Secondly, there are some domestic narratives in Taiwan that also generate this sentiment that the United States is just simply not reliable. And then I think thirdly, if the people in Taiwan see, as Senator Shaheen noted, that the tariffs that were imposed on Taiwan, they're now at 20%. There's still no final agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan. Negotiations are still ongoing. But Japan and Korea have 15%, and so Taiwan feels that it's not being treated as a good partner, and they're worried about not being as competitive compared to companies in Japan and South Korea. I think there's just a widespread sense of uncertainty in Taiwan, and every time that the United States president meets with Xi Jinping, with China's leader, Taiwan is very nervous, and there were all sorts of news reports how Taiwan its interests might be damaged in that meeting. It turns out so far that they were not, but I think that concern persists as there are plans for Xi Jinping to meet with President Trump several times next year.
Good explanation. I appreciate that. Dr. Dickey, I heard in your testimony your concern about the AIT, the American Institute in Taiwan. Could you, we've dramatically increased some of the economic and security cooperation we have with Taiwan. So what are your thoughts about what needs to be done there?
Thank you, Senator. Also an important question. So as we've increased our security activities with Taiwan in particular, my understanding is we've reached max space constraints at AIT in Taiwan. There's simply not enough space to put people that need to be on the island to help execute current U.S. policy objectives in the security and other domains. I think it's well past time to direct state to do a review of the footprint at AIT and to consider whether a second or third facility needs to be added, an annex of sorts on the ground in Taiwan to allow for more people to be on the island.
Thank you. I appreciate those thoughts. Senator Shaheen.
I think we're going to need that same toolkit if we're going to deter China from acting against Taiwan and to respond if they cross the line. But as I understand, currently we don't have the authority, the United States doesn't have the authority to respond to PRC gray zone aggression with sanctions. So as Congress thinks about creating that authority, what triggers and measures would you recommend it include, and how should we coordinate with allies in the deployment of such tools?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Shaheen. Let me just begin by saying it's true. Right now, there are only a handful of executive orders under IEPA, essentially, that allow the United States to declare sanctions on China related to Xinjiang, Hong Kong, human rights, cyber, and other issues, but none related to Taiwan. And so as a direct result, in a gray zone contingency, especially a crisis, you'd have to create an authority. The executive branch would have to issue an executive order to be able to levy sanctions on a Chinese target. And so the targeting legislation that you've proposed is very helpful, but we also need the authority to follow through. Congress could take the lead in making sure that that authority exists, as they've done in other cases, and that would be quite helpful, I think, to the executive branch. I think a second point to answer your question directly about priorities. There's going to be an escalation ladder that's needed. For different kinds of provocations in the Strait, we should have different kinds of responses. We may not wish to make those public, it may be internal, but that kind of targeting work needs to be done in advance, and we need to know now what the costs will be for the United States so we can mitigate them. That kind of work is just essential and common sense. And finally, I'd like to just add one other point about coordination with allies. Our allies will be reluctant to do some of this. They understand that there'll be economic costs for them as well. One thing that's going to be critical in getting them to work with us is to help them understand that when they speak out in favor of Taiwan, when they take these kinds of stands, we're with them. And that's why, as Chairman Rishi mentioned earlier in your opening, the problem that we're facing with the punishment of Japan by China for statements by the Prime Minister is concerning. The United States has to stand with Japan, because if we don't, no other country will stand with Taiwan.
So hopefully people will take a look at it, because it does raise some troubling questions about our policies with respect to the ability to continue to compete with China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For just the reasons that you all described with regard to the economic impacts to the United States and the quality of life here in a potential Taiwan contingency. Over the past several years, Taiwan has made real sacrifices to improve its self-defense. Dr. Doshi, you outlined some of those. Raising defense spending, restructuring its force, and investing in systems that make an invasion more costly to Beijing. But even as Taiwan steps up, the United States is failing to deliver key capabilities on the timeline deterrence requires. Bureaucratic backlogs and sluggish notifications are creating vulnerabilities we cannot afford.
The security, the status of Taiwan, as all three of our witnesses have said this morning, is absolutely essential to our national security, to our economic security, to the 21st century. And whether or not we effectively deter the PRC from taking over Taiwan by force, whether through quarantine or invasion, is probably the most decisive issue this committee and this Senate will have to address. I'm the senior Democrat on defense appropriations. We are investing a huge amount in ensuring that we have the naval and the aviation and the space resources for a Taiwan contingency, yet we are missing several critical issues that you all just testified to. And I am concerned that this administration, rather than focusing and bearing down on the important and critical ways you've just suggested we could provide support for Taiwan, is taking its foot off the gas. I'm grateful for the chance to travel to Taiwan recently with Senator Ricketts and to introduce bipartisan legislation that would help address some of these key challenges around FMS that you've mentioned. The Senate has long played a central role in U.S.-Taiwan policy, back to the Taiwan Relations Act 50 years ago, and today with the Taiwan Enhanced Resilience Act signed into law by the last president. Our role today is all the more important because we have a partner in Taiwan that is stepping up in critical ways. As Senator Ricketts and I saw on our trip to the region and our visit to Taiwan, they are making dramatic investments that are significantly improving not just their defense budget, but what they're buying, what they're doing with it, and how they're delivering a whole-of-society resilience effort. It is baffling to me that despite strong bipartisan agreement that this is a critical security issue, that our president is stepping back. If we just look at a timeline of the major security cooperation announcements and congressional notifications concerning Taiwan that occurred from January 2023 to the president, this is FMS sales, FMS obligations, presidential drawdown authorities, very, very long and robust list. And then since President Trump came to office, virtually none. Ms. Glaser's testimony noted FMS sales to Taiwan in Trump's first term was a record $18 billion, but so far in this term, a tiny fraction, $300 million. On top of that, the Trump administration has canceled high-level defense dialogues, denied the president of Taiwan transit through the United States, undoing a long-standing precedent of presidents of both parties. All of this to curry favor with China in the midst of a flawed tariff fight. So from where I sit, the measure of our policy has to be the impact it has on our adversary, in this case, the PRC. Ms. Glaser, you're a recognized China expert, and you keep close tabs on the PRC's perceptions, on Xi's perceptions, the PLA's perceptions. How are they seeing all of this? How is this potentially emboldening Xi to make the decision that today's the day that he will take action, far more aggressive action and risky action against Taiwan?
Taiwan is doing, of course, a great deal to bolster its own ability to defend the island. And I know we are working closely with Taiwan, but the PRC, I think, looks at Taiwan's capabilities and sees that it can use whatever means that it has to take Taiwan. It will probably try to do so in a way that before the United States can get there. And if they see this administration as diminishing its support for Taiwan, as I said in my testimony, they will probably be more willing to use coercion, to increase measures that it has, operate, for example, in the contiguous zone around Taiwan, maybe even fly aircraft in the territorial sea and airspace. And there may be more potential for miscalculation, that they may actually think that the United States will not respond, and they could impose a blockade and then see if there is no response, that then they will wait for Taiwan to surrender when it runs out of energy.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring up the 6 Assurances to Taiwan Act, legislation I've introduced that would formally codify the cornerstone, really, of America's Taiwan policy. The 6 Assurances were first articulated by President Ronald Reagan clear back in 1982. And just to clarify, 1, the United States would not set a date to end arms sales to Taiwan, would not consult Beijing about those sales, would not play a mediation role, would not revise the Taiwan Relations Act, and would not alter our position on sovereignty, and would never pressure Taiwan to negotiate with the PRC. And really, for 4 decades, those principles have never really been formalized or codified by Congress, but have helped us shape our policy. And today, as the PRC escalates, as we have all talked about, I think it's really important. My bill simply would take what's been a longstanding U.S. policy, reaffirmed by the administration of both parties, and reaffirmed by Congress through non-binding resolutions numerous times, and codify it to ensure congressional buy-in and oversight. And I believe by codifying the 6 Assurances, that we could send this, one of the signals that we've all been talking about sending today. So, Ms. Glaser, as I mentioned, we've reaffirmed these repeatedly by the administration, but typically in resolution. However, my act is different because it puts it into law and builds a mechanism for congressional buy-in. So, in your view, what's the value of formally codifying this, and how specifically might codifying the 6 Assurances Act in tandem with TERA help reduce some of the ambiguity?
The Taiwan Relations Act has had legal force since day one, so giving the 6 Assurances legal force could help to stabilize U.S. policy toward the Taiwan Strait at a time, I think, of heightened tension, and provide reassurance to Taiwan, which I have emphasized, I think, is extremely important, that Taiwan needs more reassurance, and the public reassurance in Taiwan will enable more public support for higher defense spending in Taiwan, which I think we know is all important. And it would signal, of course, that the U.S. is not weakening longstanding support for Taiwan.
Reflect on 1979 when we withdrew diplomatic relations from Taiwan. And I believe at the time Americans were in a really bad place. They actually hunkered down in their homes that lived in Taiwan because they didn't feel safe. And ironically, I landed on the island in August of 1979 for 2 years. And just within a couple of months, that was gone, right? We were back to the status of being very special in Taiwan. And I worry that this time around is different because of things like social media and PRC's availability, right, to influence the people in Taiwan. So how do we counter that, right? And how do we not lose the battle in the hearts and minds of our Taiwanese friends?
Well, that's a terrific question, Senator. We were in Taiwan at the same time. So I arrived in Taiwan 3 weeks after we broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And I was there also it was about a year and a half. And a very interesting time that I think the people of Taiwan remain very much favorably disposed, the sentiment towards Americans in general. Yeah. I think they feel that they're not being given what they deserve, as they have been close friends of the United States. And so I think really to counter this sentiment that we need to be sending more congressional delegations. We certainly need to be approving and selling more arms. And as Lauren Dickey said earlier, this is really seen as a barometer of U.S. commitment. And of course, as Senator Rich said, there's so much we're doing with Taiwan in the military security area that we cannot make public and we should not make public. So the things that we actually can make public, we really should be doing more of, whether it's visits, even administration officials where necessary and connected to work we are doing with Taiwan, holding our bilateral dialogues with Taiwan, whether they're State Department dialogues or Defense Department dialogues or a special channel that we're not supposed to talk about. We have so much work that we do with Taiwan, and then passing the economic legislation that both Rush and I referred to earlier on double taxation, I think is really important in the 21st Century Trade Initiative, completing it.
I'm borrowing a little extra time if the chair would allow me just a few seconds. That era, that 1979 era, I think is very important for us to focus on because Taiwan was under martial law.
Yes.
Right. And to watch Taiwan go from martial law in 1979 to the democracy that they have today, I mean, that's exactly what we would like to duplicate around the world and thought we were duplicating in China, but it's gone the opposite direction. Finally, just before I yield, I'd like to also express support for Senator Ricketts' bill that would help with energy infrastructure. We really haven't had time to go down in the weeds in that, but it's a serious problem, and I think that's a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you. And your comments about your bill and Senator Ricketts' bill, I think, are appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A year ago, about this time, I went to Taiwan. I was the first member of Congress to go following the election, and I can tell you the leaders were extremely nervous about the new administration, primarily in the context of up and down support for Ukraine and what message that might be sending to China about our commitment to Taiwan. It is incredibly important that we send a very strong and consistent message. One of the issues that certainly was discussed a lot a year ago was the incredibly rapid transition in warfare technology, particularly the use of drones, and how this affects planning for asymmetric warfare. That goes to the heart of what we sometimes call the porcupine strategy regarding Taiwan. And there were concerns that Taiwan is not moving fast enough in terms of adjusting their strategy to this changing technological warfare world, because there's still a lot of momentum behind big, expensive weapon systems versus very inexpensive mines and drones that can make aggression very difficult for the aggressor, as Ukraine has demonstrated. Taiwan adjusting quickly enough to maximize the advantages of drone and mine protection against sophisticated, expensive military weapons that, including ships and planes that China might use if they were to decide to take over Taiwan.